Thank you for joining us today for Armchair Historians. I'm your host, Anne-Marie Cannon. Armchair Historians is a Belgian Rabbit production. Stay up to date with us through Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Wherever you listen to your podcast, that is where you'll find us. You can also find us at armchairhistorians.com. Armchair Historians is an independent, commercial-free podcast. If you would like to support the show, you can buy us a cup of coffee through Ko-fi, or you can become a subscribing member through Patreon. You can find links to both in the episode notes. Today, we pick up where we left off with musical director and Carradine's Cockney sing-along creator, Tom Carradine. If you haven't done so already, I strongly suggest you go back and listen to part 1, in which Tom provides the historical context of Victorian music hall, which is at the root of his musical act as well as his transition over the past 10 years into a complete vintage wardrobe and lifestyle. In part 2, we talk in depth about his personal journey and why, today, Tom Carradine feels more confident as well as comfortable in his own skin than ever before.
And all kinds of fruit and say, we have an old-fashioned tomato, Long Island potato, but yes, we have no bananas.
Yeah, I'd love to go, but I wouldn't want to live in the time. But I would really like to be able to experience that firsthand, I suppose.
I would love to go back in time. I love history. Was Charlie Chaplin, wasn't his father and his mother, were they part of that, or were they?
They were indeed, yeah. I'm not sure so much. Actually, there's a very fascinating Jules Guides video.
I know.
My good friend Julian MacDonald, who you've interviewed on your podcast. Actually, Jules and I met about 5 years ago when he came to see me perform at Wilton's Music Hall. Yeah, we kind of hit it off, and we obviously share a passion for London history. And he's a great fan of the music and the songs that I sing. It's been great to be able to share that. And that's one of the reasons why you came to find out what I do through my appearing as music on his videos.
Yeah.
Initially, Jules asked whether he could use some of my tracks from my albums for his videos. And now sometimes he'll say, oh, have you got a recording of you doing this song or this song? He did a great video a few weeks ago on George Laybourne, who was AKA Champagne Charlie. He was a musical performer. He sang things like, Champagne Charlie is my name. Also, the Daring Young Man on the Flying Trapeze.
Oh, okay.
Beautiful song. And quite a harrowing song, actually, about a couple that go to the circus to see... they go to the music hall. It mentions the hall. And to see a speciality act. We'd call it a speciality act, like a tumbler or a juggler or a trick cyclist or someone a magician or things like that. They go to see a musical bill, and they see a daring young man on the flying trapeze who makes eyes at his girlfriend in the audience. They fall in love, and she runs away with the trapeze artist. It's really sad, but it's such a great tune. And George Laybourne performed that one. I think he rests in Jules will have to correct me. I think Abney Park Cemetery. And Jules did a video on that, so he asked me to record a little bit for that.
I want to go back to the Charlie Chaplin episode.
Oh, sorry, Charlie Chaplin. He did a fascinating...
Definitely my favorite episode to date. He had his Charlie Chaplin's grandchildren. He took them. It was fascinating, and it was so informative. And we ended up going out and getting his autobiography. My boyfriend and I, we were reading, and like, oh my God, listen to this. Oh my God, listen to this. It was,
There's a fascinating cinema museum in, I think it's Kennington, in South London, south of the river, which is built in part of the workhouse that Charlie Chaplin was in at some point. So wow. It's funny to have a cinema museum which often plays Charlie Chaplin films. But yeah, there's a Charlie Chaplin connection there. But no, that was a fascinating video and that's what I think I love about Jules's videos. Ever since I was a kid, I was not born and raised in London at all. I don't have a Cockney bone in my body. I was born and raised in Coventry in the Midlands, near Birmingham. But ever since I was a kid, I've always been fascinated in London history. Perhaps that came from my father, who studied to be a university lecturer in London, and that kind of rubbed off his love of London and sharing fascinating facts. And I remember it's very kind of country kid dreaming of going and living in the big city, that I remember looking over the London A to Z, the paper A to Z maps. When I moved to London actually for university in 2000, I already knew the city really well. I knew my way around because I'd kind of studied the maps over the years.
Sure.
And those little fascinating stories about, I don't know, the ghosts of London and horrific murders and Jack the Ripper and things like that. I suppose that's where my kind of love and passion for London history came from. And it's just great that now feeds into what I do with performing these music hall songs, which are so ingrained in London history, and many of them ingrained in London social history as well, about the working class performers that perform those songs and perform them to a predominantly working class audience.
Sure. So how did you go from science to music and music hall, eventually I guess, music? How did that happen?
Yeah. While I was at university, I always wanted to move to London, and I had always enjoyed music as a being a performer on stage and actor and singer and playing the piano. And I always thought I wanted to be an actor, but the careers advice at school said, no, go and get a proper job. So stupidly, I listened to them. I enjoyed science. I read, and I still do, I suppose, but perhaps general science. I enjoy science communication and popular science. And so the step for me was to go to university, and where else but to London. So I went to Imperial College in South Kensington, just behind the Royal Albert Hall. Wonderful place to study. While I was at university, I started performing with the University Operatic Society. So we're performing not only kind of musical theatre shows, but also Gilbert and Sullivan operetta. So again, a Victorian entertainment, a slightly more kind of classy Victorian entertainment than music hall. Operetta and music hall were very much living at the same time, and there was a kind of a crossover in kind of themes and the way they were both kind of very satirical, but again very much for a different kind of clientele of audience. But no, that was great fun to do that at university, and it was during that actually, being in London, I met musical directors and keyboard players who worked on theatre shows and things, and kind of found my love of working as a musical director, a music director, a conductor and a keyboard player. Yeah, I started getting bits and bobs of work, initially on the London cabaret scene and the fringe comedy circuit, so playing for shows. And I've always loved musical theatre and that, so it kind of, it felt great to be able to do that. I taught for a while, kind of youth theatre projects. And then I was in the right place at the right time, and I got the offer of a job to go on tour with Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, national tour. And the rest is history. I then spent kind of 7 years living out of a suitcase.
So what are some of the other shows that you
I worked on the national tours of Cabaret, The Sound of Music, Scrooge as well, the Christmas Carol, and also a production of Heidi High, which was an 80s sitcom in the UK, but there was a stage version that was produced of that about 8 years ago we did. What else have I done? Oh, and then also I've had the great pleasure of playing on a couple of productions in the West End, and one new production a few years ago called The Tailor-Made Man, which was a show set in kind of pre-code Hollywood, which was great fun to do. But also I used to be a keyboard deputy or a sub on Les Miserables in the West End.
Oh.
So that was great fun. But yeah, while I was doing all of that, I got married and were looking at starting a family, decided that we wanted to kind of settle down and move out of London. I also kind of decided that I wanted to kind of focus a bit more on work at home. So I kind of hung up my touring shoes and ended up back on the London cabaret circuit, playing for acts for kind of very much the kind of the modern equivalent of the music hall scene. Things where you would have a cabaret, you would go for an evening, you would have a meal and food and a cabaret show. And the thing with that kind of circuit in London especially, because it harks back to the Weimar kind of cabaret of the 20s and 30s, and also in the music hall in some respects, and also of course French cabaret, I met a lot of vintage singers and performers who specialised in vintage music. I've always had a love of all things vintage, but it was during that I kind of discovered a real kind of love for that, but also and then exploring my love of vintage dressing and wearing.
Which I think we should add here that's pretty much your whole wardrobe is vintage. You don't step outside of that anymore.
You might see me. I mean, you can see me now. This is kind of 1940s. I've got some kind of khaki trousers on. This is kind of English country gent kind of look. But yeah, when in performance, I'm most probably Victorian or Edwardian. Or if I'm performing a gig to do with the First World War, I might wear Edwardian for that, or 1940s for a Second World War gig. But yeah, no, pretty much exclusively vintage. You might see me in a kind of striped Breton top or something if it's hot. But yeah, I have no jeans or t-shirts anymore. They've all gone.
That's amazing. I admire that. I used to actually, I've done a lot of different things in my life, and for about 5 or 6 years, I had a vintage clothing online store, and I was really I loved. But it's a big commitment to transition over to that, I think.
It is, but equally, I'm a firm believer in. It's funny when people kind of come to see perhaps my Instagram feed and see all of my wonderful outfits and combinations of things. You kind of forget the fact that it's taken me, well, at least 10 years to build that up. And starting out by mixing and matching things. And I'm not a purist when it comes to, unless I'm doing something specifically for a specific era or a specific production, I very much mix up things from different eras. So in those respects, I'm not a kind of historical reenactor.
Yeah.
Though I am involved in a World War One reenactment group. So for that, I would wear World War One officer's uniform. Kind of day to day, I like to mix things up. I like kind of classic British tailoring, but equally I love the kind of dandy kind of culture as well, and a little bit of flamboyance and with a moustache and just it's taken me a good few years to kind of find my groove, but yeah, I wouldn't change it for the world.
I enjoy contemplating and wondering what your next outfit's going to be for your self-isolation. I loved that orange vest you wore. Was it last week?
The orange one last week.
That was amazing.
It was beautiful. That actually,
dandy, definitely a dandy. You definitely looked like a dandy.
I picked that up in New York actually last May when I was over visiting. I'm talking about dandies, visiting my good friend Dandy Wellington, going to the Boater Ball last year in New York. But I picked that one up from the wonderful Crowley Vintage, Sean Crowley, a vintage dealer in New York. A fantastic menswear collection. But he specialises in American style, but he adores British tailoring. His racks are full of fantastic Savile Row suits and waistcoats. And actually, that waistcoat was made in the Burlington Arcade.
So you bought it in New York, but it was made in England.
It was made in the UK, and I have taken it back. I have literally taken it back to the shop. Doesn't exist anymore. It's the shop is there, but it's no longer the tailors that it was. But yeah, it's been back. It's done the full circle.
Oh, I love
and that's one of the things that fascinates me about these clothes. With my love of Victorian menswear, I've got a little collection of Western Costume Company tailcoats. So the wonderful Western costume, but still going and providing costumes for Hollywood movies. Through a couple of vintage dealers in the UK, I've been grateful to pick up a little collection of and the thing that fascinates me about those is they all have labels inside that say who it was made for and what character they were, and what they don't say what film, unfortunately. Things like I've got a beautiful kind of cream tailcoat with ruffled cuffs and a beautiful red lining, and it was made for Alex Plashart, who was a dancer and a choreographer and a stuntman in Hollywood. He appears as one of the dancers in Mary Poppins, the film.
Oh, wow.
But he's not wearing that tailcoat, obviously. That appeared at some point in a film that he made, or a TV show that he made, and his name is in it. I'm still, with all of them, I'm still trying to, occasionally I sit down and go on YouTube or Internet Movie Database and try and work through. A lot of the tailcoats are in a kind of classic Western cut.
Yeah.
What we'd have a kind of like morning dress cut, but made in a different fabric perhaps, or they look very Wild West.
Right.
So yeah, I would just love to be able to find pictures of them in the films, but
It's a never-ending quest, isn't it?
yeah, indeed. But it's fascinating. And in the same way with British tailoring, all of the Savile Row suits, when they were made, custom made for people,
Oh, yeah.
have name labels in. So unless a dealer has taken them out, occasionally they do, or blacked them out with a pen, it's always fascinating to be able to know the history of who wore
Right.
your clothes. It's funny, I've got a friend of mine gave me a pair of morning dress trousers, so what you'd kind of wear to a wedding with a morning coat, that were owned by Lord Saint, well now Lord Sainsbury, he wasn't Lord at the time, of the Sainsbury family who owned the big supermarkets in the UK.
Uh-huh.
So yes, I have a Lord's trousers that I wear.
That's amazing. I love it. That sounds like another episode of Armchair Historians talking about vintage dress.
Vintage dress, indeed. I dabble and delve in it. I like to play. I like to have fun with what I'm wearing.
Yeah.
And you've got a fantastic dress on today.
Oh, thank you. It's not historical.
sleeve.
It's actually
I
a costume. You know, I had to put paper in the sleeves to keep them puffed. I need to get some netting to sew in there, but
Yeah.
I really wanted them to be puffed for this. So I watched The Alienist. It's an American show, Dakota Fanning. I love the costumes in that. It's amazing. So this made me think of that. So
It's
I was
brilliant.
going through for a late Victorian kind of look, and I got my watch chain on from, it's actually Victorian.
Nailed it.
Yeah, this was actually a gift from my friend's mother, but
Is that a fob watch?
it
Or
is.
just
It's contemporary. It's a watch.
Oh.
It's contemporary, but it looks
It's beautiful. It perfectly suits it. I'm certainly one for, I love, as I said, for mixing and matching things. It's part of the game and playing the kind of long game with vintage clothing. I've got stuff in my wardrobe that I've never worn. Okay, my wife's sitting here, she's listening in. There's stuff in my
Hi, Faye.
there's stuff in my wardrobe that I haven't worn because I'm waiting to find the right waistcoat or the right accessory or tie to go with it. So yeah, a lot of it is the long game. I had a revelation with a velvet jacket that I picked up last year, and I happened across a kind of slightly gold kind of pocket square. And as soon as I picked that up, I was like, okay, just that all goes together. So it's those kind of one thing that kind of pulls everything together. And
I have to say, I'm kind of inspired, and I'm thinking about going back to my vintage roots and maybe kind of working, like you're saying, that long game, because there's just such a pleasure in it to put on vintage clothing and recreate different styles. I do like mid-century. I have some really beautiful mid-century dresses, that type of thing. But I'm kind of inspired by this whole thing.
Oh, well, it does take some balls. It takes some balls to wear what I wear and go out in the street. But yeah, I've never felt more confident in who I am and what I do. And again, just feel kind of grateful that I make a living, or I suppose pre-COVID, I used to make a living from marrying together my love of vintage clothing and vintage dress with that music and sharing that with people. And also that kind of being able to be myself, I suppose. Certainly on the theatre circuit, the cabaret circuit, when performers perform perhaps under either a persona, a character, or even as themselves, often it's a fabricated kind of character. And yeah, when I perform, it's me. It might be a kind of extra showy me. It's not me sitting on the sofa reading a book or kind of being quiet in the corner at a party. Perhaps it's a heightened version of me, but the crux of the matter is it is me. It's not a character. This is me just sharing my love of these songs, which actually, in some respects, makes it harder when criticism comes my way, I suppose, because on the internet, the wonderful internet, haters are going to hate, I suppose.
Haters are going to hate, you're right.
And you get it. And it probably smarts a bit more because when people comment on that they don't like something about a medley I've done or a song or whatever, because it's me, it hurts. But equally, yeah, I don't want to be anybody else. This is who This is who I am. And as you very kindly said earlier on, there are many people who are enjoying what I do. Certainly the self-isolation sing-alongs during lockdown and now with things easing and that we've created a real kind of community around that, and people can share their love as well of it with people who tune in every Thursday night.
Yeah. So I have a couple things still that we need to cover, but I know we've been talking for a long time, and I definitely appreciate your time.
That's all right.
I do want to say I have this up here in place of I'm having it framed. I bought two of them.
Thank you.
So I wanted to put that up there. I was hoping I'd get the framed version back. I'm really excited. I have it framed in black, and then there's a little red border around it.
Ooh,
So,
I'll take pictures of that when you've done that.
I will send it. I will put a picture on sing-alongers. What I'm talking about for listeners is my tea towel that you had created for a special edition. It's what does it say? It says, I carried on with Carradine's self-isolation sing-along. I love that. I will always cherish that.
I do too, and the wonderful design work there done by my designer Tony Bannister. When I created the act 6 years ago, which is something I've always been doing, singing songs around the piano and encouraging people to join in. It kind of solidified throughout of performing at the Twinwood Vintage Music Festival. The way that it kind of created, it was Tony's original design of my, very much that kind of wood cut. It looks like a Victorian music hall bill that really kind of, for me, solidified what I do, and I'm forever grateful for Tony for his beautiful artwork.
It's like he showed you that. He helped you to brand yourself. That's awesome.
Absolutely, and very much as you've seen, that's what I do, and all of my CD designs, and even when I mail stuff out and it's got the moustache over it, or it's got it's you're right. Tony kind of showed me in an image what it is, and it gets many compliments. So yeah, I look forward to seeing your frame one. That sounds amazing.
Oh, I'm excited about it. I did spend a lot more money on the framing than I did on the tea towel, but it's worth it. So, and also I do want to say about the tea towels. So the guy's playing the piano. I guess that's you with the mask on, and there's a bunch of rolls of toilet paper around him.
Yeah, Tony. I didn't ask for that when Tony did the initial design for the self-isolation signal.
Well, I
didn't even ask for the mask. I just asked for the logo, but with the self-isolation. And Tony sent it back, and I laughed so hard.
It's so perfect.
It's in, and it just sums up.
We're all in on it. We're all in on it. We get the joke. The other thing is, where do we find this history that we talked about in pop culture?
It's funny, these songs, and the thing that fascinates me about them is the fact that we all have a different frame of reference for them. So for me, it's my parents or my grandparents singing them to me. To some people, it might be singing them at school. I had a lovely email from a guy in the States, from Arizona, the other day saying, love all the songs you sing. It takes me back to my childhood. It's the kind of songs we sang.
Now that you said that, that's what we did in school. Those were the kind of songs that we sang in school. And I am so musically uninclined, but I love music and I love being entertained. And somebody has to appreciate the musicians and the performers, right? But I remember when we were little and when I was learning about music, which I don't have that skill. But that was the kind of music that we sang too.
Yeah, it's folk music, irrespective of where it comes from. They're all music. A lot of the music that I perform is music that comes from either a folk music background or even the musical songs are kind of really rooted in folk. They're about telling stories. As I said, get revived over the years. I mean, you only have to look at something like Daisy Bell, A Bicycle Made for Two. Written in 1892 by an Englishman, Harry Dacre, but he wrote it actually when he was in the States. He'd emigrated to the States. The apocryphal story is that he got charged customs duty to bring his bike into the States. And a friend of his joked that if it had been a tandem, it would have cost him extra. It could have cost him double. That apparently he was inspired to write this song. It's a complete load of swaddle, I'm sure. But he wrote Bicycle Belt for Two. But that song has lived on ever since because it's such a simple tune. It appears many times in kind of popular culture. The most famous one, I suppose, is Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, when as Hal, the computer, is breaking down and kind of dying towards the end, it sings Daisy Daisy.
Oh, I have to go back and watch that now.
It's a lovely little moment. And the reason why Stanley Kubrick used that was because Daisy Daisy was the first song that was ever programmed for a computer to sing by a synthesized voice.
Oh,
Again,
wow.
if you go to YouTube and have a look for Daisy Bell's synthesized voice, I think it's probably back in the 60s that they programmed a computer. Daisy, Daisy, give me your answer. They managed to synthesize the voice. So yeah, those songs live on like that.
Everywhere. It's a tough
Yeah.
question because it is everywhere.
One of my favourites actually is I'm Henry VIII I Am,
Yeah.
which of course for us is a musical song written in 1911 and performed by Harry Champion, a very famous British musical singer. But it was recorded, of course, in 1965 by Herman's Hermits.
Yeah, I didn't know that it was. I didn't realize that it was written in 1911. That's an interesting fact.
Yeah. Though, of course, Faye actually says now it was in Ghost, the movie. So, and I think it's also in an episode of The Simpsons. These songs appear. The thing with that version of that song, the Herman's Hermits only sang the chorus. They didn't sing the verse, Harry Champion's verses. So many people in the States, and certainly when I've been over in the States and mention it, people know the song. Or when Americans come to the sing-along in the UK, they know the chorus, but they've never heard the verse before.
Yeah, but you always give the music, and I love that about your sing-alongs.
Nice
you always provide the
educate and share that, really.
I'm so glad you're doing that. I love that. Every little bit of history to me that I always say that I let my guests do the heavy lifting because they tell me these great historical stories, and I've always been attracted to the historical background of pretty much everything.
Yeah, and that's what excites me as well. You've summed up, it's the stories, because these songs are rooted in a specific time and a social kind of world that actually perhaps if time had been different, if the Industrial Revolution hadn't kind of pushed so many people, brought so many people into London and into other industrial working towns in the UK, you wouldn't have had that huge need and want for that kind of entertainment, and you would have perhaps not got music hall. It's the kind of the perfect storm where everything comes together. And also because the audiences that went to see music hall shows enjoyed seeing themselves on stage. So you get performers like Harry Champion, who's portraying a working class Londoner. People like Mari Lloyd, as I said, one of the most famous female musical performers. She just portrayed a slightly naughty and saucy British working class woman. Whatever she sang, the funny songs and stories that she performed really resonated with the audience. And that's why, any music that resonates with people and makes you feel something or make you find it funny, that's what makes it work. So, but equally, those songs, as I said, have been revived over the years because they're often so simple. Those sing-along songs in the music hall, there's a very famous music hall kind of idea that if a performer sang a new song in the halls, if the audience weren't singing along by the second chorus, they would never sing that song again, because we're talking pre-wireless, we're talking pre-television, we're talking the way that music got passed on was either orally by listening to it in the halls or buying the sheet music, which is kind of like the iTunes download of the day, I suppose. You would go to the sheet shop and you would buy your penny sheet music, and you would go in knowing, oh, that song that Mari Lloyd sang the other day, oh, that one, Don't Dilly Dally, that one. And you would go and buy that sheet music. And then every house, or at least every family would have a parlour piano. And that someone, mum, dad, Auntie Doris, could play the piano and bash out the version of the song. And because also that was a huge form of entertainment, in the same way in the States with parlor pianos and ragtime and all of that, the people joining together around a party, around the piano and music. And yeah, certainly in the UK, again, talking about kind of popular culture and the way that things go, that tradition has continued. Those songs have lived on. They've been revived over the years, be that in the First and Second World War, or be that for us through Mrs. Mills and Winifred Atwell and Max Bygraves, or even we had a pop duo called Chaz and Dave, who are great musical fans. Unfortunately, Chaz died a couple of years ago, but they would sing, they would write their own songs in a musical style, but also sing all of those old Cockney songs, all these old London musical songs that actually very few people were singing then, but they kept them alive and they kept them going. And so a lot of people, certainly in the UK, know my songs, know the songs because of those Chaz and Dave covers or the Max Bygraves covers. And again, kind of skiffle music, I suppose. Lonnie Donegan, heading the kind of skiffle phrase in the 60s in the UK. He wrote songs in a musical style. He was a great fan of variety songs and funny songs. They've always been part of our culture over here. And I hope, fingers crossed, A, that I'm doing something to keep them alive, but equally there are other people out there. It's an oral tradition thing, again, the way these songs get passed on. People say, oh, I'm so glad you sang that song. I remember my mum singing it to me, or my nan, or I thought my dad made that song up because it sounds so far-fetched. But then when they come and say, oh, that song about your baby has gone down the plug hole, I thought my dad made that one up. That's not real. I'm like, yes, it is. So
that's amazing.
It absolutely fascinates me. And yeah, I hopefully in years to come, okay, we might be singing songs by the Beatles or songs by Queen or ABBA or Sweet Caroline.
You occasionally do.
Which
that.
I do indeed. Because when I created the sing-along and kind of was finding my feet in the early days, because I adored Victorian music hall songs so much, I wanted to do something purely musical. The problem with that is when you play to a pub crowd, in order to create the atmosphere of a good old-fashioned Victorian or wartime pub sing-along, you need to be singing stuff that everybody knows so that it can all join in, very often without the songbooks. And the problem with that is, but of course, there's many of these songs that people don't know. So in order to create the atmosphere of an old-fashioned pub sing-along, it's about playing the game. And I might start with some London songs that most people know, the popular things: Daisy, Daisy, I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles, The Lambeth Walk, Let's All Go Down the Strand. Then I can maybe do a Mary Poppins medley. Everybody knows Mary Poppins. That's rooted in music hall, those kind of the sounds and the songs of the Sherman Brothers. But people know it. And then I can throw in something like Henry VIII or a song they've never heard of before. And because they're so sing-alongable, is that a word? It is now.
It works for me. I know what you mean.
Once you've galvanized the crowd and you've got them in your palm of your hand, you can sell them something that they don't know. And as long as the chorus is easy enough to pick up, they'll be singing. Yeah. And then I'll do a Beatles medley, but then I might throw in Two Lovely Black Eyes, a Victorian musical song. People might know the chorus, but they won't know the verse. And it's just about kind of playing that game with a crowd. And equally, there are times if I play a pub gig where I look around and no one's interested, and it's just about me playing selections from, My Fair Lady, Oliver, as I said, Sweet Caroline, Country Roads, anything that's going to get an audience singing along. So
you got to read the audience.
One song, there are two songs actually, that I'll let you into my secret. There are two songs that, irrespective of where anybody comes from in the world, chances are they know. One of them is easy and one of them is hard. The easy one is You Are My Sunshine.
Okay.
1940s American song, kind of cowboy kind of style song, but everybody seems to know it because, again, the verse and the chorus is the same tune. It's really easy to pick up. But the second one that everybody knows is really hard to sing. It's really hard to play, and the lyrics mean nothing. And that's Bohemian Rhapsody.
I know. Well, I can. Yeah.
Everybody knows it. But it's funny that of all the songs in the world, Bohemian. I know if I'm playing to a completely cold crowd, if I started with Bohemian Rhapsody or I started with You Are My Sunshine, I will pretty much get everybody singing along. It's just
okay. That's amazing.
It is a small world.
It is a small world. Oh, there's another song. It's a Small World.
Oh, it's a small world after all, of course. Well, again, that harks back to all the Disney stuff. Irrespective of when you grow up, I'm assuming the majority of us watched Disney films as kids.
Yeah.
So, okay, you can kind of sometimes tell how old people are through the films they know and what their kind of sweet spot of Disney is. For me, actually, I was chatting to a friend about this the other day. Mine was the kind of pre-Beauty and the Beast and Little Mermaid. So kind of the dark days of Disney, the Fox and the Hound and Basil the Great Mouse Detective, which I adore as a film, but in the kind of late 80s, just prior to Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Lion King, all of that. But yeah, it's funny, you can kind of, but even then as a kid, I remember watching The Jungle Book and Mary Poppins, as I said.
Yeah. That was the first movie I ever saw at the movie theater, my mother told me, was Mary Poppins. And I don't really remember it. I must have been pretty young, but she said in the middle of it, I said, "Can we change the channel?"
I couldn't even imagine as a kid going to see Mary Poppins on the big screen. That would have been, yeah, amazing.
I love Mary Poppins. Yeah, I think we've pretty much covered everything I wrote notes about. But so, do you have any questions for me? Do we not talk about something that you want to talk about, or?
No, I think, yeah. If you're happy with what we've covered, then
I am very happy with it. I will probably end up getting 2 episodes out of this because I'm seeing that we really have talked for a long time, which I'm so grateful for your time.
As soon as it's out, send me the link and I'll share it around, because that's one of the lovely things about the especially the sing-alongers group is doing interviews like this and podcasting things. It's been great to kind of share even more about my kind of background and how I came to it for people, because people have been fascinated about, it's bizarre, about me and how I've kind of come to these things. So, and equally these fascinating bits of history about the songs. So yeah.
Well, and you're keeping that history alive, and I hope that it seems like you really enjoy talking about the history of, everything you've learned, and you have so much information that could be part of pivoting into something else. Hopefully, are you coming to Boulder next year?
That's the plan, indeed.
Okay.
For the 1940s ball.
I've seen that advertised. I've never gone to it, but
yeah,
I'll have to go if you guys come.
Yeah, I would love. Well, yeah, just fingers crossed. I just hope things have kind of blown over by then, and we can be back to some sense of normality. Because I'd love to do it. Because,
so have you been to Colorado?
No, not at all. I've only been to when Faye and I came to. We did our honeymoon 14 years ago. Tomorrow. It's our wedding anniversary tomorrow.
Oh, happy anniversary.
So yeah, 14 years ago we came to New York, and we did the classic New York honeymoon. We went on the train to Niagara.
Oh, yay. My French relatives, every time they come over, they want to go to Niagara.
Yeah. So we did Niagara an overnighter. Or it was just a kind of overnight thing. And then we went to Boston, and that was lovely.
I love Boston. Boston reminds me of London a little bit. If there's anywhere in the United States it's similar, it's Boston.
Agreed. We liked it, and obviously so much history in Boston too. It was. We're planning to do New York again next. Well, we were planning to do New York this October, but that's not going to happen. So we've kicked that back till next October half term. But equally, now with the sing along, got kind of friends and contacts all over. So Nick and Gillian Perry, who run a vintage shop in Salem, near Boston. I'd like to go and see them at some point. So it's just trying to work out. And equally, come be back to New York to see Dandy and see some of my kind of friends over in New York too. Yeah, just hope that we can kind of get to back some sense of normality. Though I suppose if there's one thing that kind of COVID and lockdown has kind of proved to me is that we kind of take international travel for granted. But yeah, we'll see how things go.
We'll see. Yeah, that's it. We just don't know. Hopefully, when you come, we'll have a better president. Oh my God.
I feel for you guys, and actually not only with Trump, but the sense of unease and the kind of divide within the country.
I didn't realize, until the last election, it was a real eye opener, because I live in this bubble of, people who are loving and accepting and liberal, and I didn't realize that there was so much divisive kind of beliefs in this. I didn't realize it.
Yeah,
and
it's true. It's Brexit Yeah, we have a similar thing with Brexit. And it's very much a kind of you sit on one side or the other, as you can appreciate from what I do with the sing along, because a lot of what I do is kind of patriotic. I sit on a very fine line between, and I think there is a time and a place for healthy patriotism, but not in a nasty way. But one of the things that I love to celebrate with singing patriotic British songs is not about the smiting our enemies and not being slaves to anybody else, is the fact that actually I'm proud to be British, because we are such, especially London, is such a melting pot of cultures and communities. And actually, musically, we would not have half of what we have if we didn't have that. Thinking of French Huguenots who came over to London in the 1800s, or the Jewish immigrants, or as we said, the Belgian refugees, those kind of things that, in the same way, in the States, I suppose, the kind of immigrants that came into New York, all the Tin Pan Alley composers, you think that if that didn't happen, that whole history would be told differently. But with what I do, it's such a tricky position to be in, because
you bring it, you probably don't even know you're doing it, but you bring everybody together that, you don't know what their belief system or whatever is, but when everybody starts singing those songs, you're all together, and that's a beautiful thing. I have hope for next year. Fingers crossed. So I guess I'll see you on Thursday.
See you Thursday. Where are we? I've still got a couple of days, haven't I?
Yeah, you got a couple.
Yeah.
Today's
I lose
Tuesday.
track of the week.
Tomorrow's the wedding anniversary.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which normally you'd be doing all your prep.
I would normally be prepping, so it's going to be thrown together this week. So in which case, Anne-Marie, can I play you a request? Is there anything that you would like?
Oh, I don't know. Something.
Would you have a think? I've put you on the spot. Have a think, and drop me a line.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you so much. Happy
great
anniversary, Faye.
Oh, Faye's going to come say hello.
Coming your way. Hello. I've enjoyed this thing.
Good. It was a great interview. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yes.
I eavesdropped.
What you can't see, of course, we're in the middle of building works, and literally upstairs, my old music room, it is a completely different thing now. But all of the junk is tucked below camera shot down here.
I know you showed us last week, and Faye scolded you for that.
It's getting worse. It's getting worse. Day.
That'll be nice.
It's going to be lovely.
Yeah. Tom Carradine, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, my pleasure. It's been wonderful to chat with you.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Nice to see you. All the best.
P.S. I did come up with a request for that week. It was something French in honor of my mom, Therese, who passed away 3 years ago. Without knowing it, Tom selected one of my mom's favorites, the signature song of Edith Piaf, La Vie en Rose. It literally brought a tear to my eye. Thanks for that, Tom. Be sure to check out this week's episode notes for more information on Tom, as well as resources about his favorite history. Thanks for listening. Have a great week.
with the dawn, I knew